Have you ever spoken too much only to realize every word you gave away became a weapon in someone else's hand? Have you ever walked out of a meeting, a relationship, or an argument thinking, why did I reveal so much? Why didn't I just stay quiet? And the worst question of all, have you noticed how the loud ones get ignored while the silent ones somehow command the room? This is the pain. Nobody admits out loud. Most people talk themselves into weakness. They beg for approval. They explain to be understood. They rush to fill every silence because silence feels unbearable. But here's the brutal truth. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is power. When you stay silent, the other side begins to sweat. They wonder what you're thinking. They second-guess themselves. They reveal their fears without realizing it. A calm pause can shake the strongest opponent more than a scream ever could. Machiavelli understood this, the man who waits. The man who speaks last owns the game. Think about it. In business negotiations, the desperate one talks too much, lowering his own price. The powerful one stays silent, watching the other side collapse under the pressure of their own words. In relationships, the needy one begs to be heard. The sovereign one withdraws, and suddenly everyone comes running. Silence bends perception. It multiplies respect. It makes your presence magnetic. But here's the twist. Most people will never master it because silence requires courage. It demands that you resist the urge to explain, to prove, to shout. It demands that you be willing to let others drown in their own noise while you stand still. And when you do, everything changes. Suddenly, you don't chase validation. Validation chases you. You don't compete for attention. Attention finds you. You don't beg for power. Power bends toward you. So let this sink in. Silence is not weakness. It is a weapon sharper than any word you could ever speak. If you want more of these hidden truths, the kind of lessons that the world doesn't want you to know, but that can change everything for you, then stick with me. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter in this series, because once you learn to master silence, you will never be the same. Have you ever noticed how people get nervous when silence fills the room? Have you ever watched someone panic, scrambling for words just because you didn't reply right away? And here's the real sting. How many times have you been that person filling the silence with excuses, over-explanations, or nervous chatter, only to regret it later? The truth is simple. Most people are addicted to noise. They confuse talking with power, and they don't realize that every unnecessary word is a confession. Silence, on the other hand, is unbearable for them. They'll do anything to escape it, even if that means exposing their weaknesses, fears, or hidden motives. Machiavelli would call this the perfect trap. Say nothing and let others tell you everything. Think about your own life. How many job interviews have you walked away from wishing you hadn't talked so much? How many arguments at home ended badly because you kept defending yourself instead of letting the other person unravel? How many deals have slipped through your fingers because you rushed to fill the silence and gave away your position too soon? This is the cruel psychology of silence. People project their own fears into your quiet. They assume you know more than you do. They think you're stronger than you are. They start talking to cover their discomfort, and in that panic, they hand you their secrets. Silence exposes. Silence interrogates without asking a question. Silence makes others carry the burden of filling the void. But here's the twist. Most people will never master this. Why? Because silence takes discipline. It feels unnatural. It feels risky. You'll want to jump in to defend, to explain. But the moment you do, you lose the advantage. Those who can endure silence, who can weaponize it, always end up holding the upper hand. They walk away with better deals, stronger respect, and deeper influence. So here's your challenge. The next time you feel the urge to break the silence, resist. Let them talk. Let them show their cards. And you'll see how much power you gain just by doing nothing. Silence is not empty. It's full of answers. If you're ready to keep learning these dark but liberating truths, subscribe now. Don't just watch life happen. Equip yourself with the tools of power. Stick with this series and you'll never hear silence the same way again. Have you ever walked out of a negotiation feeling sick to your stomach, knowing you gave away too much too fast? Have you ever replayed the moment in your head when you should have stayed quiet? but instead you kept talking and watched your power slip through your fingers. And the hardest truth, have you realized that the deal didn't fall apart because they outsmarted you, but because you couldn't endure the silence? Here's what nobody teaches you. In negotiation, silence is the deadliest weapon. The one who talks first usually loses. The one who fills the quiet with nervous chatter always pays the highest price. Why? Because silence creates pressure, and pressure makes people break. Think back. Maybe it was asking for a raise. You gave your number, then kept rambling, trying to justify it. By the time you stopped, you'd already lowered your value in their eyes. Or maybe it was buying a car you couldn't stand the salesman's pause, so you rushed to speak, and suddenly you were paying more than you wanted. You thought you were negotiating, but really you were negotiating against yourself. That's the cruel psychology of silence. When you can't handle it, you fold. But when you can, the other side starts sweating. They doubt themselves. They reveal their bottom line without you ever asking. Silence is the invisible hand that moves the deal in your favor. Here's the twist: most people will never master this because silence feels unbearable in high-stakes moments. They confuse talking with strength. But Machiavelli would remind you the ruler is not the one begging to be heard. The ruler is the one who can sit back, watch, and wait. So next time you're in a negotiation, remember this. Your words are currency. Spend them sparingly. Let silence do the heavy lifting. Hold your ground and you'll see how quickly the deal tilts in your favor. Silence doesn't just win arguments. It wins contracts, promotions, respect. If you're ready to learn how to wield silence like a weapon in every area of life, from business to relationships, subscribe now. Don't miss the next chapter. The secrets are only getting darker and the power only grows stronger. Have you ever felt drowned out in a world that never shuts up? Do you ever scroll through endless feeds, hearing everyone shout for attention, and wonder why your own voice feels invisible? And here's the haunting truth. Have you noticed that the loudest people often have the least power, while the quiet ones, the ones who rarely speak, seem to control everything? Noise is everywhere. Noise is cheap. Anyone can shout. Anyone can post, argue, complain, and demand to be heard. But noise doesn't equal influence. In fact, the more someone screams for attention, the less authority they project. Why? Because desperation is loud. Confidence is quiet. Think about the rooms you've been in. At work, the coworker who talks endlessly in meetings is ignored. The boss who stays quiet until the very end. Everyone leans forward when they finally speak. In relationships, the one who yells to prove a point loses respect, while the one who holds back gains it. Even in politics, speeches don't win wars. Resources and strategy, usually managed in silence, do. Here's the cruel paradox: our culture rewards noise in the short term. The loud influencer gets views. The dramatic friend gets attention, but long-term power, that belongs to silence. When you don't waste words, when you wait, when you let others empty themselves, you become the one people listen to. Silence makes your words scarce, and scarcity creates value. And here's the twist: noise fades, shouting drains, but silence compounds. The fewer words you use, the heavier each one lands. This is why Machiavelli would tell you, if you want to be respected, learn to speak less. Let your silence amplify your presence until people can't ignore you anymore. So ask yourself, do you want to be part of the noisy crowd, or do you want to be the quiet force they all pay attention to? Silence wins when noise burns out. Silence lasts when noise dies. If you're ready to learn how to weaponize silence against the chaos of the world, subscribe now. The next chapters will show you how to turn silence into status strategy and ultimate freedom. Don't miss it. Have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, or written off just because you didn't fight back, didn't explain yourself, didn't shout to prove your worth? Have you ever felt the sting of people laughing at you, thinking you're weak, while deep inside you're holding back more power than they could imagine? And here's the real question. What if that underestimation isn't a curse, but a weapon? Most people fear being underestimated. They want to be seen, recognized, validated. That's why they overtalk, overreact, overcompensate. But Machiavelli would tell you there is no greater advantage than letting your enemies believe you're harmless. Silence is the mask that hides your strength until the exact moment you choose to reveal it. Think about it. In the workplace, the quiet employee often gets ignored until the day they make one move that changes the game. In relationships, the person who doesn't argue is labeled soft until their silence forces the other side to crumble in guilt or insecurity. On the battlefield of business, politics, and power, the most dangerous players are rarely the loudest. They are the ones who smile, nod, and wait. Here's the twist: being underestimated sets the stage for surprise. When they think you're weak, they don't guard themselves. When they think you're passive, they reveal their secrets. When they think you're silent because you have nothing to say, they never see the strike coming. And when it lands, it's devastating. The mask of silence is not cowardice. It is strategy. It allows you to observe, to gather intelligence, to prepare your moment. And when that moment arrives, the same people who mocked you will stand stunned, powerless, exposed. So the next time someone underestimates you, don't rush to prove them wrong. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate. Let them hand you the element of surprise. And when the time comes, you'll crush them with the weight of everything they never saw coming. Silence isn't weakness. It's camouflage. And camouflage is the oldest, deadliest trick in the game of power. If you're ready to learn how to turn silence into your ultimate disguise and weapon, subscribe now. The deeper we go into this series, the sharper your edge will become. Don't miss what's coming next. Have you ever felt the tension rise when someone suddenly goes quiet on you? Have you ever replayed a text you sent panicking because they didn't answer, wondering if you said the wrong thing, if you've already lost? And here's the darkest truth. Have you noticed how silence doesn't just make you uneasy? It terrifies you. That's the hidden power most people never learn. Silence doesn't just protect you, it weaponizes fear. While noise tries to convince, silence makes people doubt, and doubt eats them alive. Think about it. When someone yells at you, you know where they stand. But when they fall silent, your mind runs wild. What are they thinking? Are they planning something? Did they already win and I don't know it yet? The imagination is crueler than reality. Silence feeds it until fear grows larger than the truth. In business, silence is the most unnerving negotiation tactic. Say nothing after they make their offer and watch them squirm, lower their price, or sweeten the deal just to escape the tension. In relationships, silence is even sharper. Ignore the argument, hold your tongue, and suddenly the other person is apologizing for things you never even brought up. In war, silence before the strike is what makes enemies lose sleep. They fear what they cannot see or hear. Here's the twist. Fear doesn't come from what you say. It comes from what you don't say. The less people know, the more they imagine. And in that imagination, you are larger, stronger, and more dangerous than you really are. Machiavelli would whisper, "Never reveal your strength too soon. Let silence magnify it. Because silence creates an aura. It makes you untouchable, unpredictable, unforgettable. So the next time you feel pressured to explain, defend, or overtalk, remember this: silence unsettles more than 1,000 words. Hold your tongue and let fear do the work for you. Because in the game of power, silence doesn't just protect, it conquers. If you're ready to master silence as a weapon of fear, subscribe now. The next chapter will show you how silence becomes the ultimate test of loyalty. Don't miss it. Have you ever wondered who would still stand by you if you stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped explaining yourself? Have you ever noticed how some people disappear the moment you stop giving them attention, favors, or constant reassurance? And here's the painful truth. Most of the support you think you have isn't real. It only exists as long as you keep feeding it. This is where silence becomes more than a weapon. It becomes a test of loyalty, a test of truth, a test of who actually values you and who only values what they can get from you. Think about your own life. Maybe you've been the one always checking in with friends, always carrying the weight of the conversation. The moment you go quiet, they vanish. Or maybe, in your career, you're the one constantly updating, reassuring, and proving yourself, yet when you stop, the silence shows who really respects your work and who only pretended. In relationships, it's even harsher when you pull back, When you stop explaining every thought, you find out who loves you and who only loves the noise you provide. Here's the twist. Silence reveals what words hide. People can say they're loyal. They can swear they're with you. But silence strips away the performance. If they're real, they'll remain. If they're fake, they'll flee. Silence doesn't just test them, it exposes them. Machiavelli would remind you trust is the most expensive currency. Never give it away freely. Instead, use silence to measure who deserves it. The ones who endure the quiet are the ones you can build with. The ones who vanish when you go silent, let them go. They were never yours. So the next time you feel the urge to over-explain, to keep chasing connection, resist. Go silent. See who calls. See who stays. And you'll know once and for all who belongs in your circle. Silence is the truest loyalty test. If you're ready to learn how silence not only tests others, but also bends entire groups to your will, subscribe now. The next chapter will reveal how silence shapes the battlefield of war and influence. Don't miss it. Have you ever felt the dread of waiting, knowing something was coming but not knowing when? Have you ever stayed awake at night replaying every possibility in your head because the silence on the other side was louder than any threat? And here's the cruelest truth. Fear doesn't come from battle itself. Fear comes from the silence before the battle. In every kind of war, whether on the battlefield, in the boardroom, or in your personal life, silence is the first strike. When your opponent doesn't see you move, doesn't hear your plan, doesn't know what you're holding back, their imagination becomes their executioner. They create nightmares in their own mind, and those nightmares weaken them before you even take a step. Think about it. In history, the armies that moved quietly without warning created the deepest terror. The enemy never knew where or when the attack would come. In business, the competitor who says nothing while quietly building his empire shatters the loud rival who wasted time boasting. In relationships, silence before a decisive action makes the other side panic, apologize, or reveal their insecurities long before you ever raise your voice. Here's the twist. Silence isn't absence, it's presence multiplied. When you don't show your hand, your enemy imagines you're holding everything. When you don't reveal your timing, they believe you can strike at any second. The silence becomes a shadow that follows them everywhere, draining their confidence. Machiavelli would whisper, "The quiet before the storm is the most dangerous part of the storm." The truly powerful don't announce their moves. They let silence do the psychological damage, then deliver the finishing blow when the enemy is already broken inside. So the next time you face conflict, resist the urge to reveal, to boast, to explain your next step. Stay quiet. Watch them tremble in the waiting. And when you finally act, your silence will have already won half the war. Because in the game of power, noise provokes. But silence destroys. If you're ready to master silence not just as protection, but as a weapon of total psychological war, subscribe now. The next chapter will uncover how silence transforms ordinary leaders into legends. Don't miss it. Have you ever worked under a boss who never stopped talking, giving endless speeches, over-explaining, shouting just to prove they were in charge? Did you notice how little respect they actually earned? And here's the brutal question. How many times have you mistaken loudness for leadership, only to realize later that the true leaders in the room barely spoke at all? The painful truth is this: noise doesn't equal authority. Real authority doesn't need to yell. Real authority doesn't chase attention. Real authority sits in silence and lets everyone else bend toward it. Think about the rooms you've been in. The person who talks endlessly often loses credibility with every word. But when the true leader finally speaks just a few words, the entire room goes quiet. People lean in, they take notes, they obey, not because of the volume, but because of the weight. Silence made those words valuable. In business, the silent leader lets others argue posture and perform. Then with a calm decision, they close the matter. In families, the parent who constantly yells is ignored, but the parent who speaks little carries real authority. Even in politics, the ones who rule for decades aren't the loud performers. They are the quiet architects, working silently, building systems that outlast speeches. Here's the twist. Silence doesn't just protect leaders, it creates leaders. By holding back, by resisting the need to dominate every moment, the silent leader forces others to project strength onto them. People assume the quiet one knows more, sees more, understands more, and that assumption becomes reality. Machiavelli would say, "The lion roars for show. The fox waits in silence." Leadership is not about sound, it's about control, and silence is the purest form of control. So the next time you feel the urge to shout to prove you're in charge, resist. Lead with silence. Let your presence speak first. Then, when you finally choose words, they will carry the force of law. Because in the end, the world doesn't follow the loudest voice. It follows the quietest one that cannot be ignored. If you're ready to learn how silence doesn't just build authority, but shields you from weakness, subscribe now. The next chapter will reveal the dangerous line between silence as strength and silence mistaken for weakness. Don't miss it. Have you ever been quiet in a meeting only to be dismissed as if you had nothing to contribute? Have you ever stayed silent in an argument and the other person smirked, thinking they won? And here's the most painful truth. How many times have you let silence be mistaken for weakness, when in reality you were holding back your greatest power? This is the dilemma of silence. Most people confuse it with surrender. They think if you don't fight, you've lost. If you don't argue, you're scared. If you don't explain, you're guilty. And that's why silence is so misunderstood. But here's what Machiavelli would whisper. Silence is not weakness. Silence is choice. Think about it. The weak stay silent because they have no options. The strong stay silent because they have too many. The weak avoid confrontation because they fear losing. The strong avoid confrontation because they've already won. The difference isn't the quiet, it's the reason behind it. In business, a weak negotiator stays silent out of fear. A powerful one stays silent to make the other side sweat, second guess, and reveal their hand. In relationships, silence from weakness creates distance. Silence from strength creates control. Even in politics, a leader who hides in silence collapses, but a leader who wields silence strategically becomes untouchable. Here's the twist. Silence exposes you if you don't own it. If you sit quietly with nervous eyes and slumped shoulders, people sense weakness. But if you sit quietly with calm posture and steady confidence, people sense danger. The same silence, two completely different messages. Machiavelli would remind you, it's not what you do, but how you are seen. So if you choose silence, wear it like armor. Own the room with your presence. Let your stillness radiate strength, not fear. So the next time someone mistakes your silence for weakness, let them smile. Wait. Watch them collapse under their own arrogance. And when you finally move, they'll realize silence was never surrender. It was the setup. Because silence in the hands of the strong isn't retreat. It's dominance. If you're ready to master silence as power, not weakness, subscribe now. In the next chapter, we'll uncover how to treat words like money, spending them with precision, and why silence often holds more value than 1,000 explanations. Don't miss it. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and thought, I said too much? Have you ever revealed your plans, your weaknesses, or even your pain, only to watch someone use your own words against you? And here's the sharpest question. How many times have you gone broke, not in dollars, but in words? The truth is, brutal words are currency. And just like money, the careless are always poor. The more you spend recklessly, the weaker you become. The disciplined, the ones who ration their words, who know when to stay silent, become rich in respect, influence, and control. Think about it. In negotiations, the one who overshares loses leverage. In arguments, the one who keeps explaining looks guilty. In social media, the one who posts every detail of their life ends up exposed, mocked, or forgotten. Meanwhile, the one who speaks rarely, when they do speak every word, lands like a hammer. Here's the Machiavellian law. Every unnecessary word is a debt. Every silence is an investment. In business, you don't give away numbers until you must. In relationships, you don't confess every thought, you let mystery create value. In leadership, you don't lecture for hours, you speak briefly, and people remember it for years. Why? Because scarcity creates power. The less you say, the more people want to hear you. Here's the twist. It's not just about talking less. It's about talking with purpose. Words must be like dollars directed, intentional, invested, where they bring return. The poor throw money away on impulse. The weak throw words away for validation. The powerful deploy both with precision. Machiavelli would remind you, the tongue can bankrupt a man faster than any thief. So treat your words like your fortune. Guard them, count them, invest them, and most importantly, never waste them. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, justify, or overshare, stop. Ask yourself, is this word an asset or a liability? If it's not building your power, keep it. Let silence grow your wealth. Because in the end, words are cheap, but silence is priceless. If you want to keep learning how to turn silence into power, subscribe now. The next chapter will reveal how silence becomes the sweetest trap, luring others to destroy themselves while you say nothing. Don't miss it. Have you ever argued with someone who didn't fight back, who just sat there calm, quiet, unshaken, and felt yourself losing control? Have you ever poured out your words desperate to win, only to realize later that you revealed too much too soon? And here's the bitter truth. How many times have you walked straight into the trap of silence, destroying yourself while the other person said nothing? This is one of the most Machiavellian tactics in existence. Silence as a trap. The silent one doesn't need to accuse you, doesn't need to defend themselves. They simply create a void. And human nature hates a void. You feel the need to fill it. You talk, you justify, you confess, and in that rush, you hand over your power. Think about it. In a negotiation, the moment the other side goes quiet, you panic. You start lowering your offer, revealing your limits, or making promises you can't keep. In arguments, silence forces you to keep speaking until you've said things you never meant to. In relationships, when someone refuses to answer, your imagination runs wild. You start apologizing for things you didn't even do. Here's the twist. Silence doesn't have to prove anything. It lets you prove everything against yourself. The trap isn't in their silence, it's in your reaction to it. Machiavelli would remind you, he who talks too much digs his own grave. The trap of silence works because most people cannot stand uncertainty. They would rather expose themselves than sit with discomfort. That's why the one who controls silence controls the game. So the next time someone goes quiet, don't fall into the snare. Don't rush to explain, to justify, to win. Pause. Wait. Endure. And remember, this silence is not weakness, it's bait. If you use it well, you'll watch others destroy themselves while you sit untouched. Silence doesn't chase victory, it lures victory in. If you're ready to learn how silence not only traps others but also builds legacies that outlast noise, subscribe now. The next chapter will show you how silence moves beyond individuals and shapes entire societies. Don't miss it. Have you ever felt invisible in a world obsessed with noise? Have you watched people chase likes, shout opinions, and perform for attention, while deep down you wonder why none of it seems to translate into real respect? And here's the hardest truth: society doesn't actually follow the loudest voices. It bows to the quietest powers working in the shadows. Look around. The influencers scream, the politicians perform, the crowds cheer, but who writes the laws, who funds the campaigns, who builds the systems? Everyone else has to obey, not the noisy crowd, not the loud talkers. The real authority belongs to those who stay silent, who move in the background, who let others burn themselves out chasing applause. Noise entertains, but silence rules. Think about history. The loud revolutionaries gave fiery speeches, but the dynasties who survived for centuries were silent families who controlled land, money, and influence. Think about business. The showmen brag on stage, but the quiet shareholders decide who rises and who falls. Even in your personal life, you know this. The friend who never stops talking is forgotten, while the one who speaks rarely commands your attention when they finally do. Here's the twist. Society loves noise, but obeys silence. Why? Because noise is cheap and temporary. Silence is expensive and permanent. Words fade. Money laws and institutions, the silent forces remain. That's why the true elite rarely reveal themselves. They don't need to shout. Their silence bends society without anyone noticing. Machiavelli would whisper, "The crowd will worship noise, but they will die under silence." The powerful understand this game. They let the masses fight for attention while they quietly own the arena. So ask yourself, are you chasing noise or are you building silent power? Are you fighting for applause or are you preparing to be untouchable when the applause fades? Silence isn't just personal, it's structural. It doesn't just win arguments, it shapes nations. If you're ready to learn how silence doesn't just work in society but becomes the ultimate weapon before a decisive strike, subscribe now. The next chapter will reveal why silence before action creates fear that crushes enemies before the first move. Don't miss it. Have you ever waited for a reply that never came and felt your chest tighten as the silence grew heavier than any answer? Have you ever sensed that someone was planning something against you, but the lack of words, the lack of movement, drove you insane? And here's the cruelest truth. What we fear most is not the strike itself, but the silence that comes before it. This is the psychology of dread. A punch hurts when it lands, but the pause before it, the moment when you know it's coming but you don't know when, that's what breaks people. And that's why silence before the strike is one of the most devastating weapons of power. Think about war. Armies collapse not just from bullets, but from sleepless nights before the invasion. Think about business. Competitors fold not when you launch your product, but when they've heard nothing for months and assume you're building something unstoppable. Even in personal life, silence before confrontation leaves people spiraling, apologizing, confessing, and crumbling before you ever raise your voice. Here's the twist: the strike is only half the weapon. The silence before it does the real damage. It eats away at confidence. It magnifies fear. It makes small threats look like doom. And when the strike finally comes, the enemy is already broken inside. Machiavelli would remind you anticipation is more destructive than the blow. The strong use silence as a storm cloud gathering weight, creating pressure until the world below bows in fear of the coming thunder. So if you want to command power, don't announce your moves. Don't roar before you act. Let silence hang heavy. Let it work on their nerves. By the time you strike, they will already have surrendered in their minds. Because silence doesn't just prepare the battlefield, it wins it before the battle even begins. If you're ready to learn how silence not only breaks enemies, but also builds unshakable fortresses around you, subscribe now. The next chapter will reveal how silence transforms from a tactic into a legacy power that outlives even your voice. Don't miss it. Have you ever wondered what people will say about you when you're gone? Have you ever felt the fear that your voice, your struggles, your very existence might vanish without leaving a mark? And here's the brutal truth. Most people die as loudly as they lived, but are forgotten as quickly as their noise fades. Yet the ones who built their power in silence, they are remembered forever. This is the paradox of legacy. Loud people chase recognition. They want applause, titles, headlines. But applause dies the moment the crowd leaves. True legacy isn't written in noise, it's carved in silence. The quiet builder. The strategist, the one who didn't waste words but left results, those are the names etched in history. Think about it. Think about dynasties weren't created by shouting. They were built in silence, investments, alliances, structures that outlasted lifetimes. In business, the silent founder who worked in shadows leaves behind companies that outlive their own children. In families, the quiet parent who built stability, not with endless speeches but with silent sacrifices, becomes the ancestor everyone whispers about with reverence. Here's the twist. Silence isn't just power in the moment. It's power across generations. The loud may dominate today, but the silent architect controls tomorrow. Why? Because silence forces action. It focuses on building, not boasting. And what is built in silence cannot be erased by noise. Machiavelli would whisper, "To be feared in life is strength. To be remembered in death is legacy. Noise dies with you. Silence properly used echoes long after." So ask yourself, are you spending your life chasing claps that will fade or building silent fortresses that will stand after your last breath? Are you talking to be heard or building to be remembered? Because in the end, legacy doesn't care about noise. It cares about impact. And silence, more than words, leaves the deepest mark. If you're ready to learn how to turn silence into your eternal signature, a power that outlives your voice and even your life, subscribe now. The final chapter will reveal the ultimate truth: silence, not as a tactic, not even as legacy, but as absolute freedom. Don't miss it. Have you ever felt chained to the noise of the world, forced to answer calls you didn't want to take, forced to defend yourself against accusations that didn't deserve a response, forced to explain your choices just to be accepted? Have you ever wondered why true freedom feels so far away even when you're doing everything right? And here's the truth. No one wants to admit. Most people are not free, not because they lack money or time, but because they lack silence. Noise is slavery. Every demand you answer, every insult. You react to every explanation you give just to prove yourself. That's a chain tightening around your neck. You think you're living, but really you're obeying. Silence breaks those chains. When you choose silence, you choose sovereignty. You no longer owe anyone your voice, your energy, or your attention. You don't need to defend yourself because your silence declares, "I don't answer to you." Think about it. In business, the man who doesn't chase deals, who can stay silent and walk away, holds all the leverage. In relationships, the one who doesn't argue every accusation but quietly enforces boundaries becomes untouchable. In society, the person who resists the urge to shout with the crowd carries an independence the mob will never understand. Here's the twist. Silence isn't just a tactic. It's the highest form of freedom. Because when you no longer feel the need to explain, when you no longer beg to be understood, when you can sit in silence and feel complete, that is real liberation. Machiavelli would whisper, "The final victory is not power over others. It is power over yourself." And silence is that victory. It is the proof that you are no longer ruled by noise, by fear, or by the desperate need for approval. So the next time you feel the urge to respond, to prove, to fight, pause. Let silence answer for you. That is freedom, because the world cannot control a silent man. If you've made it this far, you already know silence is not weakness. Silence is wealth, weapon, shield, and finally freedom. Subscribe now and join me for what comes next. Because this isn't the end, it's the beginning of your sovereignty.